The silence felt different that night, not the comfortable quiet we used to share while reading together, her feet tucked under my legs on our couch. This was the kind of silence that cuts through your chest and makes you realize you've been holding your breath for months. "Sleep on the couch tonight," she said without looking up from her phone. Her voice was flat, dismissive, like I was a stranger asking for directions. The same voice that once whispered, "I love you," against my neck, now treated me like an inconvenience in my own home. I stood there in the doorway of what used to be our bedroom, watching her scroll through messages that made her smile in ways I hadn't seen in weeks. The glow of her screen illuminated a face I no longer recognized. When did she become someone who could dismiss 3 years with 4 careless words? That's when it hit me. The house deed sitting in my desk drawer downstairs. The mortgage I'd been paying alone for 2 years while she figured things out. The utilities, the repairs, the dreams we'd built in rooms that apparently only belonged to me. I didn't sleep on the couch that night. Instead, I made a phone call that would change everything. By morning, she'd learn what it really means to be locked out of someone's life. Sometimes the person who breaks your heart hands you the key to your freedom. The realtor's pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed the final papers. 26 years old, and I was buying a house, not just any house, but the house. The one with the bay windows that caught morning light like trapped sunshine, the one with the kitchen island where I could already picture lazy Sunday breakfasts and intimate conversations over coffee. "Congratulations," she said, sliding the keys across the mahogany table. "You're officially a homeowner." But even as I held those keys, cold and sharp against my palm, I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking about Emma. About the way her eyes had lit up when we'd walked through the empty rooms 2 months earlier, about how she'd traced her fingers along the windowsills and whispered, "This could be ours." Ours. That word had become my religion, my driving force through every overtime shift and skip dinner out. Every sacrifice felt like an investment in a future I could almost taste. Emma in our kitchen, Emma in our garden, Emma asleep beside me in our bedroom with the vaulted ceiling she'd fallen in love with. The mortgage papers bore only my name, my credit score, my down payment, my signature on every dotted line. Emma had been between jobs during the application process, and then her new position didn't pay enough to qualify as a co-borrower. "It's just paperwork," I'd told myself. "What matters is that we'll be building a life together." I drove straight to her apartment after signing, keys burning a hole in my pocket like a secret I couldn't wait to share. She was on her laptop when I knocked, still in the oversized sweatshirt she wore when she was stressed about work. "I got them," I said, dangling the keys like a promise. Her smile was radiant, the kind that made me forget every sleepless night I'd spent calculating mortgage payments and interest rates. She launched herself into my arms, and, for a moment, everything felt perfect. We were young, we were in love, and we had a home waiting for us. "When can I move in?" she asked against my neck, and I felt something shift in my chest, a small displacement, like a picture frame tilting on a wall. Move in, not move in together. Not start our life together. Just move in, into my house, with my mortgage, under my responsibility. But love makes you deaf to warning bells, doesn't it? Love makes you translate her words into the ones you want to hear. So I kissed her forehead and said, "Whenever you're ready, it's our home now." Our home. Even then, standing in her cluttered apartment with boxes of her life scattered around us, I was the only one who truly believed those words. The first red flag came disguised as a compliment. "You're so good at handling the bills," Emma said, curled up on the couch I'd bought alone while she worked a double shift. The electric bill lay open on the coffee table between us, addressed to me, as always. 3 months into living together, and we'd settled into a routine I hadn't consciously agreed to. I paid for everything, mortgage, utilities, groceries, repairs, while she contributed what she called emotional support and what I was beginning to recognize as selective presence. "I could help with the electric bill this month," she offered, but her tone carried the weight of someone hoping to be told no. I looked at her face, soft in the lamplight I'd chosen specifically because it flattered her features, and felt that familiar tug of wanting to be her hero. "Don't worry about it," I said, like I always did. "I've got it covered." Relief flickered across her expression so quickly I almost missed it. Almost. The grocery issues started subtly. She'd eat the food I bought but never add items to the list. When I asked what she wanted from the store, she'd shrug and say, "Whatever you think is best, you know what we need." But somehow, we never seemed to have what she was craving, and she'd sigh like I'd failed some test I didn't know I was taking. "You're overthinking things," she said, when I mentioned feeling like our relationship had become one-sided. We were in the kitchen I'd dreamed of sharing with her, but she was scrolling through her phone while I cooked dinner. Again, relationships aren't about keeping score. But I wasn't keeping score. I was drowning in the arithmetic of it all. Every bill, every repair, every responsibility had my name on it while she floated through our home like a beautiful guest who'd forgotten to leave. The night the dishwasher broke, I spent 2 hours on my knees with a Ren H and a YouTube tutorial while she sat at the kitchen island, complaining about having to wash dishes by hand. "This is so inconvenient," she said, painting her nails a shade of red that reminded me of warning signs. "Can't you just call a repair guy?" "I'm trying to save money," I said through gritted teeth, my hands cramped from reaching into the tight space behind the unit. "You worry too much about money," she replied, blowing on her fresh manicure. "Life's too short to stress about every little expense." Easy words from someone who'd never seen a mortgage statement. When my friend Jake visited the following weekend, he noticed what I'd been training myself not to see. "She seems comfortable," he said after Emma had retreated upstairs, claiming a headache when it came time to clean up after the dinner I'd cooked. "What do you mean?" Jake looked around the living room, at the throw pillows she'd chosen but I'd bought, at the art she'd hung but I'd paid for, at the home I'd created for us but she'd simply moved into. "I mean, she seems really comfortable, maybe too comfortable." That night, lying next to Emma in the bed I'd assembled myself, I stared at the ceiling and wondered when loving someone had started to feel like losing myself. Her breathing was peaceful beside me, untroubled by the weight of responsibility that kept me awake calculating next month's expenses. Love wasn't supposed to feel like carrying someone else's life along with your own, was it? The first time I caught her hiding her phone screen, we were having breakfast in the sunny kitchen that had once felt like the heart of our home. Now it felt more like a stage where we performed the roles of a couple in love. "Who was that?" I asked, as she quickly flipped her phone face down, cutting off the soft glow that had been illuminating her smile, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks. "Just work stuff," she said, but her voice carried that particular lightness people use when they're telling carefully constructed truths. "Sarah from accounting. She's having drama with her boyfriend." Sarah from accounting. I'd never heard that name before, despite Emma telling me about her co-workers constantly. But I nodded and took another bite of the eggs I'd made for both of us, tasting the bitter flavor of doubt along with the salt. The phone habits escalated quickly after that, bathroom breaks that lasted 20 minutes with soft typing sounds filtering through the door, late-night work emails that made her giggle in ways my jokes hadn't in months. The device that had once been carelessly left around our home now followed her everywhere, guarded like state secrets. "You're being paranoid," she said when I mentioned feeling disconnected from her. We were getting ready for bed, and she was facing the mirror instead of me, applying expensive night cream I'd bought during one of her subtle campaigns for better skincare. "I just feel like we don't talk anymore," I said to her reflection. "We're talking right now." But we weren't, not really. We were exchanging words while her attention remained somewhere else, someone else. Even our conversations had become performance pieces, her playing the role of attentive girlfriend while mentally composing messages to whoever made her light up, like I used to. The intimacy died gradually, then all at once, what had once ceased been natural and passionate became scheduled and perfunctory. She'd kiss me goodnight like checking an item off a to-do list, her body present but her mind clearly elsewhere. The night I tried to initiate something real between us, she pushed me away with irritation instead of explanation. "I'm tired," she said, but her voice held the particular exhaustion of someone who'd been pretending all day. "We used to. Things change," she cut me off. "People get comfortable. It's normal." But an hour later, I heard her laughing at something on her phone, the sound carrying through the bathroom door like a knife between my ribs. Whoever was entertaining her at midnight wasn't making her too tired for engagement. I lay there staring at the ceiling I'd painted sage green because she'd said it would be calming. Now it felt like lying underwater, drowning in the silence of a relationship that had become a hollow shell of itself. She started working late more often, coming home with stories about co-workers I'd never heard of and projects that seemed to require an unusual amount of after-hours socializing. "It's networking," she'd explain, but her eyes never quite met mine when she said it. The worst part wasn't the growing distance, it was the way she'd still perform affection when it suited her. Public hand-holding, social media photos of us looking happy, sweet gestures when her friends were around. She'd become an actress playing the role of my girlfriend while auditioning for someone else's leading lady. One morning, I woke up to find her already dressed for work, standing at the window looking out at the garden I'd planted for her. The early light caught her profile, and for a moment, she looked like the woman I'd fallen in love with. "Good morning," I said softly. She turned to me with surprise, as if she'd forgotten I lived there too. "Oh, morning." Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of perfume I didn't recognize and the lingering feeling that I'd become a stranger in my own home. The dinner party had been my idea, a way to bring life back into our home, to remind Emma and myself of what we'd built together. I spent 3 days preparing, turning our dining room into something magical with candles that cast warm shadows on the walls I'd painted by hand. I'd made her favorite dish, lamb with rosemary and garlic, the recipe I'd perfected over months of practice, because she'd mentioned loving it at a restaurant we could barely afford. The wine was one I'd been saving for a special occasion, and the flowers were arranged in the vase she'd admired at that little shop downtown. "This is beautiful," my friend Sarah said as she and her husband Tom took their seats at the table I'd refinished myself. "You two have such a lovely home." Emma smiled, the radiant smile she saved for company, and for a moment I felt proud. This was what I'd worked for, this sense of accomplishment, of having created something worth sharing. The conversation flowed easily through dinner, stories, laughter, the comfortable warmth of friendship. I kept glancing at Emma, watching her animated face as she told stories about work, feeling like maybe we'd found our way back to something real. Then Tom asked the question that shattered everything. "So, when are you two going to make it official?" He raised his wine glass with a grin. "I mean, you've got the house, you're living like a married couple. When's the wedding?" The silence that followed felt like a held breath. I looked at Emma, expecting to see the shy smile she usually wore when people asked about our future. Instead, her face had gone blank, closed off like shutters in a storm. "Oh, we're not really," she started, then laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "We're just taking things day by day, no need to rush into anything serious." Anything serious. 3 years of my life. 3 years of building a home, Shari, and dreams, planning futures. Reduced to nothing serious in front of people who knew exactly how much I loved her. I felt something crack inside my chest, not a clean break, but a splintering fracture that would leave sharp edges forever. The lamb I'd spent hours preparing turned to ash in my mouth. The wine I'd saved for celebration tasted bitter with the flavor of public humiliation. "But you two seem so solid," Sarah said, confusion clear in her voice. She'd been to my house before Emma moved in, had seen the transformation from bachelor pad to love nest. She knew the story, even if Emma was rewriting it. "We're just flexible about the future," Emma said, her hand reaching for her wine glass in a gesture that somehow excluded me entirely. "No pressure, you know?" The conversation moved on, but I remained frozen at the head of the table I'd built with my own hands, hosting a dinner party in the home I'd bought alone, watching the woman I loved perform indifference to our entire relationship. After our friends left, Emma helped me clear dishes in the kitchen where I'd made her coffee every morning for 2 years. She hummed while she worked, completely unaware that she'd just publicly erased everything we'd supposedly built together. "That went well," she said, rinsing plates in the sink I'd unclogged last month. "Sarah and Tom are fun." I stood there holding the serving platter that had held the lamb I'd made specifically for her, watching her act like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just announced to our friends that 3 years of devotion meant nothing serious. "Emma," I started, but she was already moving past me, already mentally somewhere else. "I'm exhausted," she said. "I'm going to take a bath." And she left me standing in the kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of a dinner party that was supposed to celebrate our life together, finally understanding that she wasn't confused about our future. She was certain it didn't include me. The rain had been falling all evening, drumming against the windows like an accusation. I sat in the living room reading, or trying to read, while Emma lay on the couch scrolling through her phone with that particular smile she saved for other people's messages. We hadn't spoken since dinner, which had consisted of takeout eaten in silence. The container sat on the coffee table between us, another meal I'd paid for while she contributed nothing but presents that felt more like absence. "I'm going to bed," she announced around 10, stretching like a cat in the lamplight. She looked beautiful, as always, but it was the kind of beauty that felt performed now, like she was maintaining herself for an audience I wasn't part of. I nodded without looking up from my book, though I hadn't absorbed a single word in the past hour. The sound of her footsteps on the stairs I'd carpeted echoed through the house, followed by the running water of the shower I'd had installed when she complained about the old one's pressure. An hour later, I closed my book and headed upstairs to the bedroom we'd shared for 2 years, but which felt increasingly like her domain. She was already in bed, but instead of sleep, she was typing on her phone, illuminated by its glow like some modern Venus receiving digital love letters. I brushed my teeth in the bathroom she'd slowly taken over with products I'd bought but wasn't allowed to touch. The mirror reflected a man I barely recognized, tired, hollow-eyed, diminished. When had I started looking like someone who apologized for existing? When I came out, she was still typing. The soft clicking of her manicured nails on the screen filled the silence that had become our relationship's soundtrack. "Emma," I said quietly. She didn't look up. "Can we talk?" "About what?" Still typing, still glowing in that blue light that never seemed to shine on me anymore. "About us. About where we're going." Finally, she looked up, and I saw something in her face I'd been refusing to recognize for months. Irritation. Not at the conversation, but at me, at my very presence in my own bedroom. "We've talked about this," she said, setting her phone aside with the careful patience of someone dealing with a child. "We're fine. You're overthinking things again." "Are we fine?" I asked, sitting on the edge of the bed I'd assembled myself. "Because it doesn't feel fine. It feels like you're somewhere else even when you're here." She sighed, the kind of deep theatrical exhale people use when they're being tremendously inconvenienced. "I'm tired of having this conversation." "We never have this conversation. Every time I try to talk about how I'm feeling, you shut me down." "Because your feelings are exhausting," she snapped, and there it was, the truth she'd been hiding behind politeness and deflection. "You're always so needy, so insecure. Can't you just be happy with what we have?" What we have. A relationship where I provided everything and she offered nothing but her physical presence. Where I built a life and she simply inhabited it. "What do we have, Emma? Really?" She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw her calculating something behind her eyes. Then she delivered the words that would end everything. "Sleep on the couch tonight." 4 words, spoken with the casual cruelty of someone dismissing a servant. Not "I need space," not "let's take a break," just a command issued to someone she saw as her personal accommodation provider. I stood there in the doorway of the bedroom I'd dreamed of sharing with her, watching her pick up her phone again like I'd already ceased to exist. The couch she wanted me to sleep on was the one I'd bought alone after she'd been too busy to go furniture shopping. The blanket folded on its arm was from a weekend trip she'd skipped to hang out with friends. Every comfort she was casually denying me, I'd provided. Every luxury she took for granted, I'd earned. That's when something cold and calculating settled in my chest. Not the explosive anger of betrayal, but the quiet fury of someone who'd finally seen clearly. She could dismiss me, but she couldn't dismiss the reality of whose name was on every document in this house. I thought about all the nights I'd slept alone while she worked late. All the bills I'd paid while she complained about not having spending money. All the times I'd apologized for existing too loudly in the space I was paying for. Maybe it was time she learned what it felt like to have nowhere to sleep at all. The rain against my office window sounded different at 2 a.m., not like the romantic backdrop to cozy evenings I'd once imagined, but like the steady drumbeat of revelation. I sat at the desk I'd assembled from IKEA boxes, surrounded by documents that told the story of my life in brutal detail. The house deed lay open before me like a roadmap to freedom. Every page bore my signature, my credit score, my financial responsibility. The mortgage statement stacked beside it showed 24 monthly payments made from my account alone. Not once had Emma's name appeared on anything that mattered. I pulled out a legal pad and began making lists, the way my father had taught me to solve problems, break them down into manageable parts, then tackle each piece systematically. What's mine? House, deed, mortgage, down payment. All furniture purchased before she moved in, all furniture purchased after she moved in, all appliances, repairs, improvements. Both cars, she'd never had credit to co-sign. The savings account I'd been building while she figured out her career. What's ours? I stared at this section for 20 minutes. The groceries she'd eaten but never bought. The Netflix account in my name that she used to binge shows. The memories of a relationship where only one person had been truly present. What's hers? Clothes, personal items, the expensive skincare products I'd bought her, the jewelry from birthdays and anniversaries, the books she'd never read. The last list was painfully short. In 3 years of living together, she'd accumulated almost nothing of her own except the things I'd given her. At 3 a.m., I called my lawyer. David had handled the house purchase and would know exactly what rights Emma had in this situation. The phone rang twice before his groggy voice answered. "This better be an emergency," he said. "It is. I need to know what happens if I want someone out of my house. Someone who's not on the lease, not on the mortgage, not on any of the paperwork." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if he'd gone back to sleep. Then, "Are we talking about Emma?" "We are. Give me 10 minutes to wake up, then call me back." By 3:30, I understood my situation completely. Emma was what the law called a tenant at will, someone who lived in my property with my permission but had no legal claim to it. I could ask her to leave at any time, and if she refused, I could begin formal eviction proceedings. But I wouldn't need to. Because Emma had made one crucial mistake in her calculation of power dynamics. She'd forgotten that comfort and legal rights weren't the same thing. At 6 a.m., I scheduled an appointment with a locksmith for the following day. By sunrise, I had a plan that felt as solid as the foundation I'd laid for this house 3 years ago. I made coffee in the kitchen where we'd shared quiet mornings back when her presence had felt like a gift instead of a burden, but this time, the silence felt different. It felt like possibility instead of suffocation. For the first time in months, I wasn't walking on eggshells in my own home. The morning light streaming through the windows I'd installed revealed dust motes dancing in the air, and I realized they looked like freedom taking shape. Emma's footsteps on the stairs came around noon, late enough to avoid any risk of meaningful conversation, early enough to claim she wasn't sleeping the day away. She appeared in the kitchen doorway still in her pajamas, expecting to find me in my usual state of apologetic availability. Instead, she found me at the dining table I'd assembled alone, surrounded by legal documents and printouts that told the story of exactly who owned what in this house. "What's all this?" she asked, and I heard something new in her voice, uncertainty, maybe even fear. It was the most genuine emotion she'd shown me in weeks. I looked up at her for the first time in months without feeling the need to apologize for taking up space in my own home. "Just some paperwork," I said quietly. "We need to talk." "I'm changing the locks today," I said without looking up from the house deed spread across the dining table. The words fell into the morning silence like stones into still water, creating ripples I could feel even before I saw them. Emma stood frozen in the kitchen doorway, still in her silk pajamas, the ones I'd bought her for Christmas, from her Amazon wish list that somehow always found its way to my credit card. Her coffee mug, the personalized one that read, "World's Best Girlfriend," purchased by me, ironically, trembled slightly in her hand. "What do you mean?" she asked, but her voice had lost all its casual authority from the night before. I finally looked up at her, really looked at her, and saw a stranger wearing the face of someone I'd once loved. "I mean exactly what I said. You have until this evening to pack your things." The silence that followed was different from the suffocating quiet that had been strangling our relationship for months. This was the silence of someone realizing their free ride had come to an abrupt stop, that consequences existed even for people who thought themselves untouchable. "You can't be serious." She set down her mug with more force than necessary, coffee sloshing onto the granite countertop I'd sealed myself last summer. "This is just about last night, isn't it? You're being dramatic because I asked you to sleep on the couch." "This isn't about last night," I said, gathering the mortgage statements into a neat pile. "This is about the last 2 years. This is about you living in my house, eating my food, using my utilities, and contributing nothing but criticism and indifference." She tried to sit down across from me, probably hoping familiarity would give her some advantage, but I'd moved the chair she usually occupied, stacked it against the wall with others I'd bought for dinner parties where she'd publicly dismiss our relationship. "We can work this out," she said, standing awkwardly beside the table. "I know I haven't been perfect, but nothing." I slid the house deed across the table toward her. "Look at this. Really look at it. Whose name is on there?" Her eyes skittered across the document like she was reading a foreign language. Which, in a way, she was. The language of legal responsibility, of financial commitment, of actual adult partnership. "That's just paperwork," she said weakly. "This paperwork represents 3 years of mortgage payments, 3 years of utility bills, property taxes, insurance, repairs and improvements. 3 years of building equity in a property you've contributed exactly nothing to, except complaints about the water pressure." The tears started then, and I recognized them immediately, not the tears of genuine remorse, but the strategic crying of someone whose manipulation tactics were failing. She'd used tears to end arguments before, to make me feel guilty for expecting basic respect in my own home. "I love you," she said, and the words sounded hollow even to her. "No, you don't," I replied simply. "You love the lifestyle I provide. You love having a beautiful home you didn't have to work for, bills you don't have to pay, and a man who asks for nothing in return except basic human decency." She tried everything then: anger, bargaining, threats, promises. She called me controlling, manipulative, cruel. She swore she'd change, that she'd contribute more, that she'd be better, but her promises felt as empty as her recent affections, desperate words from someone who'd never valued what she had until it was gone. I watched her scramble for her phone, calling friends who suddenly weren't available, family members who couldn't help immediately. The network she'd been carefully building behind my back apparently didn't include anyone willing to house her long term. "Sarah can't take me in right now, she has company," she said after the 5th call, "and my sister's apartment is too small, you can't just throw me out on the street." The locksmith arrived at 5 p.m. sharp, his van pulling into the driveway I'd had resurfaced last year while Emma complained about the noise. I stood in the doorway watching him work, each tumbler that fell into place sounding like freedom, like the mechanical click of a life being reset to factory settings. "High security locks," he said, holding up the new keys. "These are some of the best on the market. Nobody's getting in without your permission." Nobody's getting in without my permission. The words felt revolutionary after years of living in my own space, like a guest who might be asked to leave. Emma had packed more than I'd expected. Apparently she'd been planning her exit strategy longer than I'd realized. The missing items told their own story. Expensive jewelry I'd given her, designer clothes from shopping trips I'd funded, the laptop I'd bought her for Christmas. She'd taken everything that held monetary value, leaving behind only the everyday items that had no resale worth. Good. Let her try to build a new life on gifts that had never meant to her what they'd meant to me. The house felt different immediately, like a held breath finally released. I walked through rooms that seemed bigger somehow, as if her absence had given the walls permission to expand. The living room where I'd been exiled to the couch now felt entirely mine again. The kitchen where she'd criticized my cooking while contributing nothing welcomed me back like an old friend. I cooked dinner for one that night, really cooked, not the half-hearted meals I'd been making while walking on eggshells around her moods. Pasta with fresh herbs from the garden I'd planted, wine from a bottle I'd been saving for a special occasion. This felt special enough. I ate at the dining table instead of standing at the counter like I'd been doing for months, avoiding the space where her disinterest had turned very meal into a performance of domestic failure. The silence around me wasn't empty, it was full of possibility. After dinner, I did something I hadn't done in years. I left the dishes in the sink, not because I was lazy or inconsiderate, but because I could, because there was no one here to sigh dramatically about my household management, no one to make me feel guilty for being human in my own space. I watched a movie she'd always criticized, the volume at whatever level I wanted. I read with the lights as bright as I needed them. I existed without apologizing for taking up space in the house I'd worked so hard to afford. The bed felt enormous and perfectly cool. No one hogged the covers or complained about my reading light. No one sighed dramatically when I shifted positions or breathed too loudly. Just silence, the good kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket instead of strangling you. I slept better that night than I had in months and woke up to sunlight streaming through windows that belonged entirely to me. The coffee I made was exactly as strong as I liked it. The music I played was whatever I wanted to hear. The day stretched ahead of me like a blank canvas, ready for whatever I wanted to paint on it. For the first time in years, I felt like I was home in my own house. But it wasn't just the locks that had changed that night, it was my understanding of what home should feel like. And it should never, ever feel like sleeping on the couch while someone else occupies the bed you're paying for. The first message came at 7:23 a.m., 2 days after Emma's departure. A text from her friend Jessica, whom I'd met exactly twice. "What the hell did you do to Emma? She's devastated." I stared at the message over my morning coffee that tasted better than it had in months, possibly because I wasn't drinking it while being ignored or criticized. The audacity was breathtaking. Emma was devastated, not the man who'd spent 3 years building a life for 2 people while only one person contributed to it. By noon, my phone was buzzing with messages from people I barely knew, all wanting to know my side of the story. I kept my responses simple. She chose to leave, I chose to let her. The details belong to us, not to social media warriors fighting battles in 280-character bursts. The real surprise was how quickly news traveled back to me through mutual friends. Sarah called that evening with updates I hadn't asked for, but found grimly fascinating. "Emma's telling people you kicked her out for no reason," Sarah said. "She's posting on Instagram about how you were controlling and manipulative. She's even using the hashtag emotional abuse." I almost laughed. The woman who'd lived rent-free in my house for 2 years while contributing nothing but indifference was now claiming victimhood to anyone who'd listen. She'd weaponized our breakup, turning her entitlement into evidence of my cruelty. "What are you going to do?" Sarah asked. "Nothing," I said, and meant it. The people who know me know what really happened. The people who believe her version without question just told me everything I need to know about their character. My lawyer confirmed what I already knew when I called to check on potential legal ramifications of her social media campaign. "She has no claim to the property," David said. "The house, the furniture, even the car she's been driving. All legally yours. She can rewrite history on her Instagram, but she can't rewrite property law." That's when I understood something crucial. The best revenge wasn't proving her wrong. It wasn't defending myself to strangers or fighting her narrative in public forums. The best revenge was living well without her. I stopped checking social media, stopped reading the messages from people who wanted drama more than truth, stopped caring whether distant acquaintances believed her version of events. Instead, I focused on reclaiming the life I'd almost lost to someone else's selfishness. I repainted the bedroom, not to erase her memory, but to create something entirely mine. I bought new sheets that nobody had ever slept in but me. I rearranged furniture to suit my preferences instead of hers. Every change was a small declaration of independence from the life I'd been living in service to someone else's comfort. The house began to feel like mine again, not just legally, but emotionally. I could walk through rooms without stepping around invisible landmines of mood and criticism. I could make noise, leave lights on, exist at full volume in the space I'd earned. 2 weeks after the locks changed, I ran into Tom at the grocery store. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd been caught in the middle of something he didn't understand. "Hey," he said carefully, "how are you doing?" "Better than I have in years," I said, and realized I meant it. He studied my face, probably looking for signs of the devastation Emma had described in her version of events. Instead, he saw a man who'd stopped apologizing for existing in his own life. "She's saying you just snapped," he said quietly. "I didn't snap," I replied, loading groceries I'd chosen for myself into a cart I didn't have to share. I woke up. 6 months later, I hosted another dinner party. The invitations went out to people who knew my whole story, friends who'd watched me disappear into someone else's needs and emerge as myself again. The house felt alive in ways it never had before, filled with laughter that wasn't performed for anyone's benefit. I'd redecorated slowly, thoughtfully, replacing items that carried the weight of compromise with pieces that spoke directly to my soul. The walls that once showcased her aesthetic preferences now displayed art I'd chosen, photographs of places I wanted to visit, paintings that made me feel something beyond obligation. The dining table where she'd publicly dismissed our relationship now hosted conversations where I felt valued, heard, appreciated. The kitchen where I'd once cooked elaborate meals for someone who barely acknowledged them, now fed people who thanked me, who brought wine, who stayed to help clean up. "This place feels so different," Sarah said as she helped me clear dessert plates. "It feels like you again." I'd forgotten what that felt like, I admitted. Someone asked if I missed Emma, and I realized the question no longer caused the sharp pain it once had. "I miss the person I thought she was," I said. "But I don't miss the relationship we actually had." The woman I'd loved had been partially fiction, a character she'd performed while auditioning for something better. The real Emma was someone who could dismiss 3 years of devotion with 4 casual words, who could live rent-free in someone else's generosity while calling that person controlling when the free ride ended. That night, after my friends had gone home with hugs and promises to do this again soon, I sat in my living room with a book and a glass of wine. The couch she'd banished me from was long gone, replaced with furniture that fit both the space and my body perfectly. Everything felt intentional now, chosen rather than accepted. The silence around me was full of contentment instead of tension, full of possibility instead of resentment, full of peace instead of the constant low-level anxiety of living with someone who saw my love as an inconvenience. I thought about the man I'd been 6 months ago, walking on eggshells in his own home, apologizing for existing too loudly, accepting crumbs of affection from someone who'd never learned to give more than she took. That man felt like a stranger now, someone I'd outgrown like clothes that no longer fit. The locks weren't the only thing I'd changed that night. I'd changed my understanding of what love should feel like. Real love shouldn't make you feel smaller. It shouldn't require you to apologize for having needs. It shouldn't leave you sleeping on couches in homes you're paying for. Real love should feel like coming home to yourself, not losing yourself in someone else's indifference. Sometimes the person who breaks your heart does you the greatest favor of your life. They show you what you're worth by showing you what you won't accept anymore. Emma told me to sleep on the couch, but she taught me to never sleep anywhere I wasn't truly wanted again. The rain started falling as I finished my wine, but this time it sounded like a lullaby instead of an accusation. I turned off the lights I'd kept on as long as I wanted and headed upstairs to the bedroom that belonged entirely to me. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight I was home, really, truly home, in the life I'd reclaimed from someone who'd never deserved it in the first place. And that felt like the beginning of everything.